YouTube channel. So I hope you're all doing okay. It's actually really horrible today outside and there isn't much light in my room. So I'm really sorry if the video looks a bit strange. So today we are going to be talking about whether you need to have an assistant psychologist position to be a clinical psychologist. If you're kind of coming into wanting to be a clinical psychologist, the main kind of job role that is branded around is an assistant psychologist position. And this is the role that everybody wants, everybody talks about. It's really difficult to get. They're really competitive. There aren't that many. And I think a lot of people kind of panic that, oh my goodness, like I've been trying to get an assistant psychologist job for ages now, and I just haven't managed to, can I ever become a clinical psychologist? Is it worth me applying to be a clinical psychologist if I haven't already had that position, and things like that. So I'm kind of just going to be talking a little bit about that today. So if you're new here, I post videos weekly about clinical psychology, careers in psychology, kind of being an aspiring clinical psychologist and things like that. So if you think that you'd be interested in that, then please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about, do I need to be an assistant psychologist to be a clinical psychologist? And the short answer to this is no. You don't have to have an assistant psychologist position to get onto the doctorate. Now the answer, isn't always that simple, and there are some things to consider when you're applying to get onto the doctorate. So when you're looking to apply for the doctorate, according to the Leeds Clearinghouse, which is the website that you apply to the doctorate through, you must have some clinically relevant experience. And that's, all it says. It doesn't say you must have an assistant psychologist position. AP jobs are suggested alongside research assistant positions, some healthcare assistant positions, working as a psychological wellbeing practitioner, a CBT therapist, amongst loads and loads of different jobs. So, like I said, the short answer is no. It doesn't say you have to have an assistant psychologist position to get on to the doctorate. So it is important to note that every university that does the course is different in terms of what experience it asks for. I would say that the majority of universities ask for at least 12 months minimum of clinically relevant experience. One university I noticed asks for 2 years. Some universities don't specify the length. Some universities will accept voluntary work as well as paid work. Some universities specify that the clinical experience has to be paid. So every kind of course is different, and it's worth having a look down at the courses that you might want to apply for, the areas that you might want to go, and what that course particularly asks for in terms of relevant experience. However, none of the courses that I could see yesterday when I was flicking through to check, none of the courses that I could see ask for assistant psychologist position especially. None of them say in order to apply for this course you have to have an assistant psychologist position. Now, some courses do specify that you have to have had clinical supervision with a clinical psychologist, or at least that your application is likely to be considered higher if you can demonstrate that you've had this clinical supervision. Or perhaps that you've been able to work alongside a clinical psychologist, and things like that. So this is kind of where the assistant psychologist position can come in. It is that direct work with a clinical psychologist. It is normally you get that supervision with a clinical psychologist that a lot of these doctorates consider, you know, really, really important. However, you don't have to have an assistant psychologist position in order to get this. So I worked as a healthcare assistant, and all the way through working as a healthcare assistant, I had supervision with a clinical psychologist in my team. You know, I asked her if I could have supervision with her, and she said yes. And that's, you know, one way to kind of get around it. You know, if you are working as a healthcare assistant or a similar job role, but there perhaps is a clinical psychologist in your team, you know, maybe ask them if they could help you, if they could, you know, supervise you, or if they've got time to perhaps do some clinical supervision with you. And that's, you know, one way to get that clinical psychologist input without having to have the assistant psychologist position. Also, I've seen people recommend that you could get in contact with clinical psychologists in your area and ask them if they would be willing to, you know, do some supervision with you. There might not be a clinical psychologist in your team, but if there is one in another team, you know, shooting them an email and asking them if they could supervise you or provide some clinical supervision. So there are ways to gain that supervision or that, you know, clinical psychology input without having to have that role. So what else counts then as clinical experience? So if you've been trying and you can't get an assistant psychologist position and you're kind of thinking, well, how else can I get this experience? There are so many other roles that you can have a look at. So some healthcare assistant roles or support worker roles are really, really helpful in gaining that experience. So for example, mine, when I worked as a healthcare assistant, that was really, really useful. For me, like I said, you know, I had that clinical supervision and I had that direct contact with people who used the service. So I worked in camps. So the children and young people who I worked with, you know, I had that direct work with them, which really, really helped. I was also, you know, allowed to work on assessments and things like that, and we had case formulation meetings every couple of weeks, so I could, you know, demonstrate that I have been involved in assessments and formulations. And not every healthcare assistant role is like that, but you know, there are some that are like that, doing similar things to what an assistant psychologist might be doing. You're gaining that direct work with individuals who use the service that you're a part of. And you know, you could be involved in so many different services and get experience in the NHS. And that would be really, really useful, especially because a lot of clinical psychologists work in the NHS. So kind of being able to demonstrate that you have an understanding of what a clinical psychologist would do in the NHS, you know, what their role might involve, is really useful to be able to demonstrate that when you're applying for the doctorate. And, you know, if you're not sure, again, finding a clinical psychologist who works where you work and asking them, you know, what they do, just again dropping them an email and just kind of asking them. But of course there are so many different other sectors too, like charity, private sectors that aren't part of the NHS. So there are lots and lots of different kind of sectors that you could work in, that you could gain that clinical experience, that experience of working with individuals who are using the service that you work for. Every course is different in terms of the experience they expect from you, the experience that they want. You know, like I said, some courses kind of ask for that minimum of 1 year, even 2 years. Some, well, I noticed that Leeds Uni yesterday asked for you to have worked in 2 different services, 2 different types of services. That's the only one that I could see that asked for that, but it's something worth bearing in mind. You know, every university is different in terms of what they would like from you, and how long they expect you to have worked in a service. And it is worth bearing in mind that a lot of universities you know, value quality over quantity, and that's something really, really important. It's not always necessarily how long you've worked, but perhaps, you know, the quality of that work that you've done and what you've learned and how that is going to improve you as a practitioner. Other kind of, you know, things that you could think about are working as a PWP, which I've talked about quite a bit on this channel, working as a CBT worker. Staffordshire University talked about actually encouraging people from different sectors, like working in education and things like that, to apply, because they really value, you know, that kind of different views, those different inputs into clinical psychology, and can use the experiences that you've had to improve your practice. And that is something that is really, really important. So overall then, the short answer to do I need an assistant psychologist position to be a clinical psychologist? The answer is no. And actually I did a poll on my Twitter earlier this week, and I think it was nearly or just below half of the people who responded said that they had never had an assistant psychologist position before getting onto the doctorate. So, you know, it is doable. It's not the be all and end all. If you're getting so frustrated because you just can't get an assistant psychologist position, it is worth just thinking, right, where can I gain this clinical experience from? It doesn't have to be that particular position. And actually, you know, some people work as APs and talk about how they actually learn more as a healthcare assistant, or they actually learn more working in schools as a teaching assistant than they did in that assistant psychologist role. You know, not every assistant psychologist role is created equal. Some are, you know, amazing and you really get that high quality of clinical experience, and some you don't, and it is possible to get onto the doctorate without having that role, and you can get clinical experience in a lot of different areas. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.